was just another day. Or so I thought, as I was going through the usual mess in my email inbox. Promos, reminders, and a few odd messages from coworkers and friends. Amid this daily grind, a mysterious email caught my eye with the subject line, "Urgent, a message for you." Something about it piqued my curiosity. It stood out from the usual stuff I receive. Without much thought, I opened it. And that's when my story began. "We know what you did, and we have all the evidence. You have 48 hours to transfer $100,000 to the attached account, or everything will be revealed." The message was concise and to the point, but it sent a wave of panic through me. How could this be? I hadn't done anything that warranted this kind of threat. I was about to dismiss it as a ridiculous prank when I noticed the attachments looked like they contained my personal data and private conversations. In that moment of panic, my device started acting up. Programs opened randomly, and my desktop wallpaper changed to a black image with the same threatening message. It was clear my device had been hacked, and this threat was no joke. I didn't know what to do. The police? What would I tell them? That I received a threatening email and my device was hacked? It seemed like that would only complicate matters further. Instead, I decided to try and figure out who was behind this myself. The first thing I did was attempt to trace the source, but my efforts were futile. The attackers had used sophisticated methods to hide their identity. As time went on, the messages increased in frequency and severity. I started receiving phone calls from unknown numbers, leaving voicemails with the same threats. The pressure was unbearable. I began losing sleep, anxiety dominating every moment of my day. Every sound seemed like an alarm, every email notification a source of dread. I was caught in a tug-of-war with an unknown adversary, pulling the strings of my life. In a desperate bid to regain control, I decided to consult with a cybersecurity expert. I had to move with utmost secrecy, fearing the hackers would learn of my moves and escalate their threats. I brought the expert to my home, explaining the situation in detail without leaving anything out. After hours of analysis and scrutiny, he managed to trace some leads that pointed us to the source of the attack. It was a shock to discover it led back to someone I had trusted in the past. Someone who had been a part of my personal and professional life. Betrayal is an indescribable feeling, especially when it comes from someone close. The motive behind the attack was a bitter mix of jealousy and revenge, stemming from old disputes I never thought would escalate to this level of madness. Armed with this information, the next step was to turn to the authorities. With the help of the cybersecurity expert, I compiled all the necessary evidence and presented it to the police. It wasn't easy. The legal battle was long and exhausting. But justice was worth every effort. Months of anxiety and suffering later, the hacker was caught and prosecuted. The sense of relief I felt after everything was over was indescribable. This experience changed me, taught me to be cautious, and highlighted the importance of protecting my privacy and digital security. Now, with time having passed, I look back on those events with a different perspective. It was a harsh experience, but it taught me a lot. In our digital world, security and privacy are precious treasures that must be guarded with all our might. On a bitterly cold night, with the sky cloaked in dark clouds, I sat in the dimly lit living room, trying to find some solace in the pages of an old book I had recently started reading. The wind was howling through the trees outside, leaving behind a sound that was unsettling. I had no idea that this night would mark the beginning of an endless nightmare. While engrossed in my reading, the silence surrounding me was shattered by the sound of a notification arriving on my mobile phone. It was an email from an unknown sender. Initially, I thought it was just random spam or a scam attempt. but curiosity drove me to open it. "Look behind you. We are watching." There was nothing else in the message. No signature. No explanation. I assumed it was a stupid prank from a friend. Yet a weird sense of fear started to creep inside me. I decided to ignore the message and return to my book. But the feeling that someone was watching me never left. Minutes later, a second message arrived. This time with an attached photo. The photo was of me, taken from outside the window next to which I was sitting. My blood ran cold, and I was completely paralyzed. How? Who? I didn't know what to do. Just stood up and quickly closed the curtains, turning on every light in the house. There was no sound outside indicating the presence of anyone, but the fear had completely taken over me. I decided to call the police. But before I could do that, the internet went down and the phone lost its signal, as if everything was conspiring against me. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a window breaking from the downstairs. My heart was pounding violently, every cell in my body screaming for me to flee. But where to? My safe haven had turned into a theater of terror. I grabbed a flashlight and a knife from the kitchen, trying to muster my courage to face what was waiting for me. Slowly, I made my way to the downstairs, every step weighed down by dread and tension. The darkness enveloped every corner, and the sound of my footsteps on the wooden floor was the only sound filling the eerie silence. Reaching the downstairs, I saw the window smashed and glass scattered on the floor, but there was no sign of anyone. I started to doubt my sanity. Was I imagining things? No. The picture and messages were proof that the fear I felt was not just an illusion. I decided to check the rest of the rooms, moving with extreme caution, trying not to make any noise that might reveal my location. Each room I entered, I expected to find the perpetrator behind this horror, but each time, I found nothing but emptiness and silence. As I was returning to the living room, the tension was broken by the sound of my mobile phone ringing again, with a heart nearly stopping. I picked up the phone to find a new message. "Why are you hiding? We are inside the house now." The terror I felt at that moment was indescribable. Every part of me wanted to run. But where? And how? At that moment, I heard soft footsteps approaching the living room, like a shadow moving in the darkness. A figure cloaked in black appeared in the doorway, indistinct and watching me. Before I could move or even scream, the lights turned red. The ground beneath me started to shake, and the room filled with eerie laughter. At that moment, I woke up, panting hard, my body drenched in sweat. It was all a dream, a terrifying nightmare, but the fear felt all too real. The sky was still covered in dark clouds outside the window, and the wind was still whistling, reminding me that nightmares might be just dreams. But the fear they leave behind can be very real. As I tried to calm myself and return my breathing to normal, I glanced at my mobile phone on the side table. I hesitated before reaching out to pick it up, half afraid that the nightmares had seeped into my reality. But no, there were no new messages or terrifying warnings. Everything was as I had left it before I fell asleep. This assurance brought me some comfort, but the fear I felt in the dream still loomed over my dark room. I decided to spend the rest of the night awake, illuminated by the light of a dim lamp, trying to read a book in hopes it would distract me from the dark thoughts the nightmare had planted in my mind. Yet, every page I turned reminded me of the loneliness and helplessness I experienced in those fictitious events. That night taught me that the human mind is capable of creating the most terrifying scenarios, and that true fear lies in what we concoct ourselves. However, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something invisible and unknown had been stirred in my world by that nightmare. That thought alone was enough to make the darkness around me seem denser, and the silence filling the house seem deeper. I always lived alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, enjoying the peace and quiet that life away from the downtown hustle provided. My night was going as usual, with a new book and a warm cup of tea, until the chain of my thoughts was broken by a notification sound from my mobile phone. It was an email from an unknown address, and for some reason, I decided to open it out of curiosity. What I read was the beginning of the worst nightmare anyone could imagine. We have photos of you with your friend in situations you wouldn't want the world to see. Now, you have two options. Either transfer us $50,000 within the next 48 hours, or we'll publish these photos on all social media platforms. The choice is yours. I couldn't believe what I was reading. How did they get these photos? And why me? At first, I thought it was just a trick, but the message included a link, and when I hesitantly clicked on it, I found myself looking at a preview of the mentioned photos. They were real, and my privacy was about to be exposed to the whole world. The panic I felt was indescribable. How could I gather such an amount in a short time? And even if I did, was there any guarantee they would keep their word and not publish the photos? It was a real dilemma. Turning to the police might mean exposing the photos faster. Keeping silent could lead to disaster. I spent the night thinking about possible steps, trying to devise a plan to deal with this threat without losing my dignity or my savings. I had to find a way to negotiate, or perhaps track down the sender and stop them before they could carry out their threat. As the night progressed, and I sat alone in front of the computer screen, I began to feel despair creeping into me, but I knew that surrendering wouldn't help. A step had to be taken, and it had to be now. After much thought and consideration, I decided to try negotiating with the blackmailer. Maybe, just maybe, I could reduce the damage without losing everything I owned. I wrote an email with trembling fingers, trying to find a balance between bravery and pleading. I know there's no escaping my situation, and you hold the upper hand. But $50,000 is an amount I cannot provide. I can give you $20,000, all that I could gather. Please, let's end this matter peacefully. I sent the email and waited anxiously, every minute feeling like an hour. Then the reply came. $20,000. We accept the offer. But remember, if the transaction isn't completed within 24 hours, the deal goes back to $50,000. The relief I felt was not without tension. Yes, the offer was accepted, but the danger was not yet over. I transferred the agreed amount. Every second of waiting was torturous. After the transaction was completed, they sent me a confirmation email that the photos had been deleted and the agreement was concluded. I didn't know if they had actually deleted the photos or still held on to them, but I knew I had to learn from this harsh lesson. I immediately took steps to enhance my digital security, vowing never to expose myself to such a type of threat again. This terrifying experience taught me the value of caution and vigilance in the internet world, where privacy can become a weapon against you in a moment. Although the fear that the photos might reappear never left me, I decided not to let this fear control my life. I chose to be courageous and to learn from this difficult experience. I realized that digital security is not just an option, but a necessity, and I must be more careful and aware of what I share online and with whom. Over time, I began to feel secure again, but I never forgot the harsh lesson I learned. Every time I think about what happened, I am grateful that things didn't escalate more than they did. This experience not only changed how I handled digital security, but also changed my outlook on life. I came to value my privacy and safety more than ever before, realizing that sometimes the toughest experiences teach us the most important lessons.